Muito boa tarde a todos e a todas e muito obrigada por...
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for being with us. We have a very provocative, interesting debate with data, statistics, analysis, practical experience, and all sort of ideas for the future. This is a discussion that is going to be provocative, and we're going to try and find out whether it's really necessary to choose between intelligent people or not, and so, or is this part of an intent? Is inclusion the future, and can we have merit in this inclusion, or is it always necessary to choose between one thing and another? That's why we have a panel of five guests, people who work in the area of companies, or with companies, or in companies, and public policies. In the area of arts, they're going to change their personal and professional experience, and at the end we'll have a couple of minutes for questions. I know there are people of various ages, some students and other workers, and so we're going to hear, and hopefully you leave here having learned something. So I'd like to start with Mariana Branquinho de Fonseca from Korn Ferry. She chooses people, the company's work. I'd like to begin by asking you, Mariana, whether have you seen the companies you work with having greater concern with diversity? Do you choose this diversity? And thank you very much. Thank you very much for being here. We note that in the last 2 or 3 years, there's been a specific request in the presentation of candidates to bring in a balanced pool of candidates. When I say balance, I say not only men or women, but basically to have an additional effort to create a balance. I'm not saying 50-50, but people with that diversity. But what do they ask you this? They say we want women, or do they ask you? How do they make this request? We've had this specific request recently. They said, "Look, I need a woman. If it's a man, I've got them here, but I would like to nominate a woman, and I'm only interested if it's a woman." Now, this request is for a reason to create diversity, or for other reasons. Well, it's difficult to give an answer, which includes all the realities. Every case is different. Now, the truth is that there are many who do it because they have to do it and they're obliged to do it. And of course, that is, we have the quota law in the case of non-executives, and then following this, if the case of the executives has to be a woman, so it has to be a woman. But diversity, just let me say something here. So we are talking about gender, but there is a request for an overall diversity, and we can see this in terms of non-executives. In executives, not so much. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean that if the strategy of my company is expansion, international expansion, then I need on the board people who have experience outside Portugal or in territories where the company wants to work. And so here we have Erasmus. We're talking about a career done outside Portugal or in Asia or America, for example. And in the area of non-executives, especially, diversity has extended to these topics. I mean, experiences, cultures, and knowledge. So, because when you talk about the question of digital, all these companies, so digital is critical, and so we look at the board, and there's nobody who has any digital knowledge, and so we have to bring this knowledge in. Questions of age. Quite often, we look at a board and we say, like, our age, medium age is 65. And so we say, no, we are talking about non-executives. We see younger generations come in. Well, yeah, about 40. And so there has to, we have to think of the experience they have, are they sufficiently mature, and in terms of technical knowledge and everything that has to be added to the board in order to, because the age in itself, it says nothing, but they must have this sufficient experience to become part of this group. So there's always a number of biases about people who are more indicative of certain functions. So Margarida, I'm going to ask you, Margarida Couto is a lawyer from Almeida, and she's part of GRACE, which is an organisation which brings companies together and look at social and corporate responsibility. And we know in the last year she had a boom of companies that have associated, so 2021, 2022, companies are open up to this stuff. And so this is an organisation, GRACE is an organisation that has existed for 22 years within the companies, still come with this idea of gender diversity, men and women, or really thinking about LGBT, the environment, ethnic issues. Are we still at the time of where are the women? Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you very much, everybody, for being here. Well, in fact, GRACE has grown a great deal in recent times, and this is a positive sign that the topics are being accepted by companies, and companies have understood that to resolve issues is easier online. So the online effect contaminates a lot because we GRACE try and try and be a little bit more in depth, and so the topic of diversity is in gender. We're talking about, yes, men and women. This is a diversity. We're talking about GRACE works a lot in clusters, and when it launched the ODS5 cluster, which is gender equality, it was immediately. So a cluster, a whole group of companies that want to work together on a topic in order for the outputs to be disseminated to all the associates of GRACE. And so when we launched the ODS cluster, can only have 20 or 30 companies, because if not, it's a mini GRACE. And so the topic of gender diversity is in the top of the agenda of those who have reached these topics. And see, and there are lots of copies that don't even know that these topics exist. And we're talking about those who are discussing this. The other type of diversity is included, sincerely, I don't think it's a concern in Portugal. There are exceptions, obviously, in everything there's exceptions, but I don't think this is a priority, except in one topic, which is not by merit, it's by compliance. Or rather, it's by conviction, but if it's not out of conviction, it's compliance, which is a diversity within the context of inclusion. And that says the disabled, to integrate the disabled, those have a more difficulty in accessing the market, so they have to be integrated. The labour market, they have to be integrated to different. There are rules and laws about this. In January, there will be laws about this, and so when a company knows their law is coming and says compliance, if it's intelligent, they will do it before compliance. I didn't do it because obligatory, because the law orders. So companies try and comply with the law when they can, when there's no alternative. And so they think, okay, if I'm going to be obliged to contract these people next year, and then I'm going to contract them this year because I can't, because I wasn't coerced to doing this, and I did it out of conviction. And then many companies send us a great, people seek out GRACE, and so we see as gender and efficiency. The other topics are not they do not have, they cannot really be considered a topic because there's no scale. And so there's with humanitarian crisis, for example, that is the topic of migrants. Many companies that want to recruit migrants, it's not so much out of diversity. We understand it helps to have a more diverse team. And so this is following a crisis. Yes, it's a crisis. But because they know that it's good, it does good, and looks good, and the companies know that diversity adds value. But initially they do it for humanitarian reasons. When there were Syrians, it was Syrians. When Afghans, the Afghans, now Ukrainians. When there's a humanitarian crisis, these companies try and help by giving jobs, and so giving jobs to people who come from other cultural, ethnic realities. They bring diversity, everything, but this is a question of social responsibility, and they feel that they have the duty to contribute by giving jobs to people who are refugees going through a critical phase in their life, and not so much because to have somebody from Afghanistan or Syria, that I'm going to have a fantastic team. So these are a question of reasons why they do what they do. And I'm going to Sandra Ribeiro, who's the president of the Gender Equality Committee in Portugal. And so honestly, just given that we are a very small cozy environment, companies see equality and inclusion as a useful instrument, or given that we're in the phase of we're doing it because I've got so many humans. I created such and such a program. I am linked to such and such a target. Well, good afternoon to everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation and allowing me to participate in this discussion. I think there's a little bit of everything here, but there's a frontline platoon, that is the companies, multinational companies, that come with human resource management culture, where the questions of diversity are already understood as an fundamental instrument for business. And they understand that to have men and women, white men and women, black men and women with diversity, and diversity in terms of gender, and so sexual diversity in terms of sexual orientation, and even religious, can be very interesting from the point of view of promoting the responses that the company can give to the enormous university of potential clients. And what is spoken about today is the retention of talent, and because there is the number of workers where it's very important, and so not so much of the wages, but because we're talking about workers who already have salaries they're considered sufficient, but they're talking about the working conditions, and so the diversity is important. But I'm talking about a very, very small number of companies. I think in Portugal, most companies have not woken up to this question. Some in their social responsibilities because they're subject to the obligatory enforcement of the law, the Couto law, and so they look for more women because they're obliged to do so, to put them in executive roles, but they haven't incorporated the question of diversity and gender equality as something that is beneficial for the business. And so how do you understand that how do you know this? Because of systematic actions. If it can be an event, and then after this, between this event and the next event in 8 and 9 months time, nobody's talking about it. And so there are practical actions. I mean, they're not very egalitarian. Concerns of diversity. Can you give the number of people who are present? Diversity, that is the panel, for example. It can be within the companies themselves, and the policies that are used may not have the gender perspective of diversity, to see that most people who are on the board are still white men, basically, and old. And they can be, you can see that the training that is provided in that company is a post-labour period where that women spend the time looking after their family or children, and so they don't have access to this, they can't go. And so there are many areas that advertise, the way we communicate, the way the company makes its own advertising. You see there's a lot where it has this spirit or not. And I have to give you a positive practical example. It's in the state, and it's in the government area of defence, where there's a total revolution taking place, and that advertising, that's one of the things you can see. Then there are public tenders to become part of the Navy or the Air Force, and the posters that exist is women who are dressed as soldiers, men and women of different colours, dressed as soldiers. This is diversity, and sometimes we see the exact opposite. Sometimes we see this communication by the companies, and it's mostly a white, monolithic, says the lady.
Apontar muita coisa.
Carlos is taken note, and I'm afraid that he's going to write a book. Carlos is a humorist and a script writer. This is the only reason why I'm writing. And we've talked a bit before this panel. Carlos was saying, I'm the person you hire whenever you want to have diversity. I am contacted, and the issue of diversity is solved. Please tell us what you think. Hello. Thank you for the invitation. The sentence is here. It's clear. It's self-explanatory. And this is a portrait of what is diversity for most of the Portuguese companies. This is it. You talked about women. The question is between men and women. This is it. Women, men, and a black man for most of the companies. So this debate is on diversity. This is a topic, and this is the diversity. This is what happens when you were saying this. When you're saying this, you debate any topic, any other topic which is not diversity. You use somebody you are contacted, but you notice this in radio programs, TV programs. I think that we see these in television programs, in events, in panels. I'm taking notes because although I'm very young, my memory is not so good. So we talked about many things. For instance, Margarida talked about the companies realize that to add value, and Susanna the same. For a change to happen, and Catarina said that when can this change come about? And the value we add, companies just do something when there is problem. Let us not, the companies make a stand because it's beneficial for them. This is an economic value, purely economic value. They can add an economic value, that they are obliged to do it. In terms of compliance, for instance, when the government makes laws so that this happens, some companies do something when they're forced to do it to add value. For instance, there's an advertising by Coca-Cola. We see two women embracing one another. It's okay, it's nice. my children are going to grow up in a universe where the two women can embrace one another. But the CEO of Coca-Cola is not worried about LGBTI. It gives profit. It's a good positioning. I'm just here to say things. But this is my idea. They do something when it's beneficial. But our mission is not so much talk about companies, because this is not a universe. Because I think, for instance, there's only my black woman working there, my aunt who's the cleaning lady. In your role as a humorist and scriptwriter, you are in RTP Africa in TV programs. You feel that you are that person who they are hired because they enjoy your work, but because it looks good, because you listen to comments, somebody tells you directly. So how do you realize this? When I go there and I see that I'm the only black person, and I know that it's not an option, it's not a collective awareness on the company side and people. There's not an awareness. For instance, I have examples, personal examples that show that this awareness sometimes is utopic. I've been in a company which calls itself a company with diversity and an inclusive company. I attend an event, and where is the I'm here for RTP Africa, so where is it? Where is the where can I go instead? RTP Africa is in Africa, I was told. So how do I understand that I go there so that they want someone like me? It's even worse. Then I go to these events and I have to listen to these comments. So this issue of diversity, and people say we're very in line because in our Christmas party we have one black boy. We felt this discrimination in TV programs, and I just I'm not confessing anything. No, I'm not going to tell you something very intimate. How is it, Carlos, how it is to be a black person in Portugal? But microaggressions is your daily life. When I go to a company and I realize that I'm the only black person, it raises the same question. It's an internal conflict, and it makes me think, why don't we have more black men? But I'm going to tell you a funny story. I have a friend. He works in an advertising agency, and he's the only black man. Last year, they wanted to take pictures of the Christmas picture, and I didn't. It didn't go in that week, and they didn't take the picture. And in fact, there was 3 weeks on a row, and they realized that they were waiting for them. So they didn't want to take the picture because they needed to take a picture with a black man. And I just told him, ask for money if you so need it.
Muito bem, então agora vamos...
Fine, so let's understand how Portugal is positioned in relation to the experience of other countries. So we have André Macedo. He's a consultant of Deloitte, very much focused on strategy. He's currently living in Amsterdam. He's been 2 years in London. So André has got a compared, a wide experience. So from what you heard so far, is this similar to the experience that you have working with clients in the Netherlands and the UK? Is it worse or better in some things? Thank you for the invitation. Portugal is not in a good position in relation to it happens abroad. This is the Portuguese reality. It's not necessarily the reality in the UK or in the Netherlands. They have their own problems for sure, but these problems are much more evolved in terms of they have a great deal of diversity in terms of race and gender. There are a series of topics of diversity. and working in different organizations, I see that this is different. It's enough to go into an office and you see the difference immediately. We're clear that we're still on the stage discussing men and women. This is no longer a subject in Dutch companies. I believe that this is a topic in any of these countries, of course.
Crítico, ou seja, existe mais diversidade.
So there is more diversity of in the different companies. Of course, multinational companies are those which are more evolved. Deloitte is much more evolved in these policies because it's present in practically all countries of the world. So naturally, these companies are better positioned. We can see a great difference, particularly in the core companies of the country. For instance, in Lisbon, if we visit several companies, we see the difference in to similar companies in the UK or the Netherlands. Let me ask you, Sandra, the fact that Portugal has got 99% of SMEs, can it represent a difficulty for diversity and inclusion? Because when people have 5 to 10 people, it's more difficult to deal with diversity than a multinational company. Yes, but Netherlands is not a country with doesn't have 50% of multinationals. It also has SMEs. Maybe with the exception of Germany and UK, are countries where the overwhelming majority of companies are SMEs. Cultural issues are very important. In Portugal, we had some difficulty in openly discussing stereotypes and racism. Only recently have we started to have this discussion, and even so, it was a very superficial level. LGBTI are now being discussed, and we see that defending equality between men and women, which is now which has been here for some years now, and we're a bit worried whether these other causes may question what we have attained so far. So there is a great cultural revolution that has to take place at the social level. Let me add, you touch a very important point, which is transparency in Portugal. How many transparency reports do we have on diversity and inclusion? Let's talk about this. Mariana, let me ask you. You have many international clients. Do you see these differences in terms of the requests companies make, depending on whether they are smaller companies or multinationals? Yes. Multinationals are way ahead on these topics in different levels. They have specific indicators which people are assessed through compliance to have teams with diversity. So this shows this concern from the start. It's a very important topic having to do with diversity. It's all very nice, but the great obstacle to greater diversity is leadership. It's very difficult to lead people who are different and who think differently. So this is why most of our companies, and I believe that in Portugal, in terms of SMEs, we have very different realities, but leadership is still must develop, should be improved, because they don't want to have in their companies people who are different, think differently, because they want to have a sort of authoritative position. It's nice to be diverse, it looks good in the picture, but in practice, the value we're talking about is zero or close to zero. Of course, diversity matters, but companies have to be prepared to know how to work with diversity, to be able to accept there is somebody who is younger, very young, who says, I don't agree. I prefer to do things differently, or somebody with a disability who says something which is criticizes the leaders. So we have to be able to take advantage of this different reasoning. Going back to your question, true, there are different realities. Portuguese companies are still lagging behind. Multinationals have already started, either because it looks well in the picture, they invest in leadership, and they realize, okay, if it's more profit, okay. At the end of the day, you add value. We're able to give opportunities for people who are different, otherwise won't have access to those opportunities. So I believe that in Portugal there's still a long way to go. We have informal reports of these resistance to diversity, saying, well, I don't know how to include people from other cultures. Is there any conflicts that people that companies are afraid of? I believe that companies at its origin are striving to attain what Mariana was saying. But, to do this in practice, there's a long way to go yet. Sometimes, these are true labyrinths and people get lost in the way and things don't come to be. Of course, there is bad leadership, and I agree. Portugal is not very different from the rest of Europe in terms of SMEs. All the European countries have mostly SMEs. It's not so much to do with SMEs. It has to do with the fact that the people who are older, and they are in leadership positions, and this is only going to change with time. The older people have unconscious bias which are deeply rooted. And when they have these unconscious bias, no matter how much they decide to do something, the bias does not agree. And even if they agree to bring people on board, they don't give them freedom, they don't trust. Worse than this, I was telling somebody, well, it's not very funny, but I've seen a CEO who's really sensitive to the topic of gender equality. Well, it's not so bad. He was ambassador of this theme. He was about to replace a financial director. He decided that he wanted to hire a woman because he was sensitive to gender equality, because he never gave hard skill roles to women. It's either human resources, nice things, He wanted to hire a woman financial director. We're very pleased, and the human resources manager was very pleased. She's also a woman. And they chose somebody, and who's going to be the benefits, the financial benefits, what is the premium, what is the salary, the fringe benefits, all that in a company is the financial package. And the human resources manager said, if Mr. X, the former financial director, had a financial package of 100, of course, the new financial director is going to have the same package. I don't understand why discussing this. And the reply of the CEO was, we don't have to pay so much. Her husband is very wealthy. And this is a CEO who is an ambassador for the cause of gender equality, because in gender equality we cannot we can't forget the lack of pipeline. Because sometimes the reply is saying, I don't have people with disabilities because we don't have 50% of the population with disabilities. Or I don't have black people because half the population is not black. We have more black people in the US, in the UK. But there are more black people than disabled people. In relation to women, I can't say I can't have more women in leadership positions because there are not enough women. There are more women than men. So it's not a pipeline topic. So on the topic of gender equality, makes us not being able to use as excuse. This is why this topic is very high on the agenda. But being high on the agenda is one thing, but to win over stereotypes is different. It's a different thing, because we have these unconscious biases, very difficult to correct, because if I'm aware that I do this, I will correct it. But if I'm not even aware, because something which is rooted in my head, a woman's not supposed to make more money than her husband. Or in certain areas, you should not give her so much responsibility, then she has children, then she disappears. There are many stereotypes who are deeply rooted, but they are unconscious. This person, this CEO was ambassador of gender equality, so I believe that the new financial director was not supposed to be paid so much. The transparency in companies and data. In Portugal, there's still some resistance, some shyness in asking some things. For instance, it's not common, it's not socially accepted. Then in a job interview, you ask somebody what is the sexual orientation or gender identity. Let's start with the international experience, and then let's move into Portugal. André, in your experience abroad, these questions are common, right? I give the example of Deloitte. If somebody applies to Deloitte in the United States, there is a explicit question about sexual orientation. Most companies in the United States do, because they have all the options, including race. So they have this data, because if there are no data, they don't know reality. It's not possible to do something without data. I'm not sure how things are in Europe. You have the data protection regulation, and it's legally prohibited to have this data. If I questions, fine. If I ask the question, I can't force a person to tell about her sexual orientation, but I can ask in a job interview, are you willing to tell what is sexual orientation? The person can say no, and the person can say yes. But I cannot make notes. But the United States, you assume that this is positive, and the Australia, the same thing applies, because it's in the forms, in application forms. When people apply, they fill in the forms, and then companies deal with this data. But these enable us for companies to have the reports on transparency, inclusion, and equity, and allows us to see what is taking place and to define measures to improve what are the shortcomings, because if we don't know what we've got. For instance, salary gaps. There may be salary gaps in a company. If we have analysis, if there are no analysis, how do you know they exist? How can we correct them? So the more transparent the companies are in what they do inside, the more responsibilities they're going to feel, and they end up by correcting. But most of the companies does not discuss the topic. They don't have data, and it makes things very difficult. And there is a culture in Portugal of not mentioning this topic. Everything's fine, but you have to talk about it, otherwise we can't change. And we can become a society with more equity, with more opportunities, so that merit works. It's a false issue. We assume that we do not discuss it because it's not a topic, and it's quite the opposite. Do you feel that, for instance, Carlos, for instance, people say, well, for me, you're not even... Well, for instance, a gay, you can't say, I didn't know you were gay, or to a woman, you can't say that I didn't see you were a woman, or I don't know, I don't know you were a black man. This is difficult. But they say this, they say, and people who they're not blind, they say these things. I didn't take notes in this case. So why did they say this? This has to do with the prejudices in society and the existing stereotypes, because in people's fantasy, there are ideas which are specific for the white people and for the black people. Jobs, professions, attitudes, and if you have certain types of behavior which is associated to part of society, automatically you're going to connect it to that part of society. For instance, with the fact that I wear a shirt, I say, we're sophisticated. I hear people say, you sound white, you sound Portuguese. So microaggressions, there you go. So if you they put you in the box that you are Portuguese, you end up by benefiting from this. It gives you a false sensation of safety, because the people decide that you are one of us, so you're going to walk the path because you are one of us. This is why I had to say, I don't know if I can't have these two standpoints. So if you behave like this, they say he's a black butt. He's not going to raise problems. You have a black boy that you can even give him a good car. You don't have to pay him so much, but still. So this is this question of saying you don't look black. And what about data? This talk about diversity is interesting, but it has its own bias. Tell me if I'm wrong or right. To discuss diversity when adult is a false issue, because it gives us a feeling that the problem can be solved, the fact of having more men, women at the company, more men, black people in the company, but the problem starts earlier on. The question of we don't start from the same position. And now comparing it with meritocracy, for instance, if there's a company and we see a black person in a given office, we knew that he was able to do it. He's got merit despite being black. But the problem comes from how many were on the way, for the simple fact that we ignored, we didn't see. Sometimes I say it's very nice if we go through quotas, we see basket, we have baskets,
paddle.
So we have basketball paddles and soccer fields. So in relation to the gender equality, are in favor or against in having more openness in relation to data sharing? In my personal opinion is that we must have more data sharing, but there are two very different things. One thing is the regulation of data protection, and it is unsurmountable. It's a European regulation. It means that you really have to apply it right away. It has to be followed. National legislation, labor legislation is very protective for the cases of job interviews where no question should be asked. In terms of protecting their person can be discriminated again because the person wanted to she's planning a pregnancy, or this sexual orientation is this or that. So this protection is granted. So the employer cannot ask questions because it is the private sphere to try to have information that possibly may be used to discriminate against this person, not to recruit or to fire, to dismiss. So there's a positive premise. However, we don't have enough information. But if at state level, for instance, the census, there was this discussion about 2 years ago. The next census will be in about 8 years' time. If we could have asked the ethnic group, sexual orientation, because nobody's going to be discriminated because he replied in a census, because the data are anonymous. It's just figures that this is what matters, because we could know. But what is happening in the job market? My specialization is labor law. How many black women there are in the top positions in the company? We know a bit. And this is what the problem is. So I do not have a problem in employment, but I have a problem of ethnic groups in the employment market. If I have no data, it's if there was no problem. So there's an absolute lack of transparency which has to be changed. If I do not know the size of the problem, as if it were never there. So I don't have to find solutions for the problem. It's an elephant in the room, but we all know there's a problem because it doesn't have a name. It's as if it wouldn't be there. So we have to improve a great deal, and I hope that in the next census there will be open in the Constitution does not allow. Now this is a false question in my view. What the Constitution does allow. Constitution states that you can't discriminate. Everybody is entitled to equal treatment, but it doesn't mean to say that you do not know who are the people and how many they are and where they are.
Mariana, this type of questions are asked by you to any of your candidates, or what is, how private do you go? We don't go very far. Well, so we don't discriminate. I mean, it's not up to me to have an opinion on that person. No, because of this, that, the other. And what I am interested is in the person's life, the personal life, because to see whether it affects their ability to perform a post. For example, if I'm recruiting somebody who's going to live in the Algarve and Porto and is in Lisbon, and then I have to ask them, do you see any disadvantage in this or in your personal life? I don't ask whether they're married. And I had a very interesting story in the past that I was dealing with the visit of an expatriate to a country, and I didn't know whether how to ask him whether he was married or whether he was married to a man or a woman. And I can't ask them. So, do you live with somebody? Is that person going with you? And then we both started laughing because he understood my difficulty. He said, don't worry, I live with such and such a person. That's okay. That's just to give you an example. So what I am sometimes confronted with, and when I was in a situation of this type recently, care candidate at the final phase, they discovered that she was expecting. And she said, look, I'm pregnant. And said, what? I said, the client was absolutely wonderful. I said, look, I'm at the beginning. And he said, fine, just come. You work until such and such a time, and then you have your maternity leave. But knowing our corporate fabric, that was an exception, because most, once again, I don't want to generalize, but I wouldn't be surprised if the reaction had been the opposite. So, the answer would be normally, nah, you better not come, because things can be complicated. This is just to say that I cannot address this directly. I try in a non-invasive way to understand what can have a negative impact, or what can influence at the limits of the decision, because this is my obligation to prevent, in a very advanced phase of recruitment, the client doesn't choose this person for one of these reasons, or the person gives up for these reasons. And it was the opposite. You were talking about equity between men and women, and the domestic work. And there's a male candidate throughout the process had never discussed. It was with his wife that was in this recruitment process when our client made a proposal, because the work would involve longer hours. He discussed it with his wife and said, I don't want it because it's going to affect my family life, and then I'm not going to be able to get to the you're not going to be able to pick up the children. So there was so when these points are raised, it's got to do with accountability, the creation of programs that embrace everybody. And so that is where you ask questions of this type. So the questions in candidates, so as far as I know, and for statistic purposes, that's exactly what we were saying. In the census, for example, this is done in the pre-candidates. I know when people are candidates, they put forward their application, and then when they're nominated, they can understand what type of employers they have, but and without knowing exactly who the person is. And so we can now know the reality within a company to make to take the right measures. And in a census, we don't really know the reality of the country. The companies themselves can have a perception, and we also have a perception of the Portuguese reality, but nobody really knows. There's no numbers. So let's finish with the merit. Carlos, I'm going to ask you, do you think that you're contracted or hired through a merit, or do you never or people never separate your merit and your identity? First of all, it's always through my merit. I think it's due to my merit, and then we can add for those who hire. It's good for those who are contracting, and I know. Okay, I'm a humorist, I'm a script writer, I'm a presenter on the television. I do consultancy for, this is really funny, you use it, but I can use this too. I use a consultant for brands that make advertising. They want to be inclusive, and so they make an ad. So we're going to show a black gentleman. This is me saying that, he says. Yes, it was the companies that went to and asked you. You didn't propose. I said, look, I'm here. I could, but no. On the one hand, it's good because for years you've seen there's nobody in this team that could authenticate to what's the name. If there was a team of script writers, if there was a team of script writers, somebody who could participate in the creative process would say, this is not the best way. So what this character has to do, his accent is no longer reality, but somebody says you have difficulty in saying it, somebody's you can see yourself as different. Is it going to say what you should do? because the person's younger. And so I was contracted as part of the team. You give your inputs, but you're not going to say how things should work. So sometimes these things happen. And so we have this ad that so you mentioned an interesting point that we're humorists who gained merit because they joked with ethnic minorities. So how do you look at this as a black humorist? As this humorist is no longer socially acceptable. I mean, because in the past there was a kind of there are some areas it takes time and others no. So this I'm jumping from one thing to another, but I enjoy this. But this idea of data collection in the companies, and you don't do this because companies are difficult in doing this. You were talking about using this against the person they're going to hire, and but I think there's something that we have to do as a society. I normally say the institutions are reflective of the civil society. And so when we look at things in a given way, this is sort of mirrors the people in society, because they have to adopt a certain stance that must be in line with what is expected of them. And so we have to make this reflection as a society, and we'll eventually get this part of humour. You did this. I mean, of course, you can no longer say this, that, the other. You can't. You can't call a gay poof, things like that, a black man a nigger, nothing like that. Everything is all politically correct, etc. So basically, what you're saying, this is not a question. This is not a reflection of the civil society anymore. I mean, let's move forward. Let's carry on. I can't say this, that, and the other. And the guy said, I was a humorist actually said, look, I am joking with the disabled. I'm not discriminating because I'm promoting them. So it's good. This approach no longer exists. It's good to have more black humorists like me. And there were they bring another perspective. Most humorists in Portugal were men, white, diversity in this area too, but there's certain of a social elite. This is a fact. And so when I appeared this, so I belonged to this social group. They were all white men. And so, if I was there, I should do a part of this group. There was a controversy with humorists. So he was a radio, and he said, I'm the song at the same time, so I couldn't follow. I'm sorry. So this reflects society. So we can't. Only one can go ahead first. So we, the blacks, because if many of us are in the front line, everybody will be afraid. And so why didn't they come here earlier? We didn't go to social media, and there's no anchorman. There's no black anchorman. And my mother said, "Look, me, you go." So go one at a time. So if you look at the radios, and this is a fact, you look at the radio, you got one black man in one radio channel, and there's another one in another channel. And I get some of my friends who said, wait a little bit longer, and then it'll be your turn. Because it doesn't make sense. You're going to turn the television on, and there are questions in Africa. The commentators are commenting. They're white men in anagoms. So, in Angola, Morocco, wherever Tunisia, they're always and that is why we talk about diversity in the adult age. It's a false question because it comes from the past. I'm a university professor of law, etc., etc. I studied in Portugal from the 8th year. I never had a black teacher, and this is symptomatic as well. So, you're an economist. Is there no black economists? And so we're going to think why there are none. And so you think, well, the company doesn't contract, it doesn't ask if it's a man or a woman. That's fine, but we're going to think about this and why is it always the same people making comments? And I'll finish here. And so I want to go for advertising. It's very good of you to be here. I founded a school in 19, and you're the first black man that appears. And why? Because my mother, I wanted to go to advertising. My mother said no. There's no. The first black person in advertising in Portugal will be you. And so this is a reality. I've got loads of stories. So we have to ask why. Why is there only one black person? Well, they don't have merit. Are they incompetent less than the others? I don't know. I think I've finished everything. Everything I've written down, I've said it. So when we talk about merit, we talk about quotas, which is always a very hot topic in Portugal. And local authorities, they have to have at least 40% of one of the sexes, or women or men. And so I'd like to know, and this is a very general question, do you think that after many years, and we continue to discuss whether this makes sense for women, do you think the future will be quotas for black people, LGBT? Margarida. The future belongs to God. Crystal balls are difficult to read. I think it's going to be very difficult because of the legal context, because to have quotas for gays or racial quotas means that I can treat the data, and the only data that I can treat is a gender, and I can ask if they get children or not. It's got to do with the taxes. I can see, I can ask people exactly how much is withdrawn, the taxes withdrawn, and so you can ask the data, all the other data. You can ask a man or woman. So the law, the quota law, is, I don't think it's positive. It's a necessary evil, and it's the way to correct a market error. And the fifth, in the past, the girls would stay at home sewing, and the boys would go to school. But there are more women who are qualified women than men. So there is no reason for this to be. There's no lack of pipeline. There's no lack of qualifications, as Carlos said. And this begins before, starts first. And if the black community, you can use the word, doesn't go to such a school because of the uncle, whoever, says it's not why or what, because you're never going to manage to get anywhere. And so when we get to the phase of the labour market, there are people without these qualifications. I think Carlos is certainly right. This has to start way back, and so the people who start way back, and it takes so long until they get to an adult age, of course, there are no injections for them to grow suddenly. And so these people, if they start integrating, going into school and changing mentalities, and now we have to wait till they get to an adult age. But I would be very surprised if there was this quota law. I would be very surprised. Just, I've already been surprised with many things, but there's quotas for gender. It was a necessary evil, as Margarida said, and it was an advance. So we're going to need this advance for other people who are minorities. Sandra. I would like to go back. Quotas is a mechanism, a legal mechanism which exists to manage to attain goals which naturally would take so long to happen. So they would have no useful effect in real time. So it's a corrective mechanism. And so there always has been a discussion, a very toxic discourse around quotas and this idea that quota who enters through quotas doesn't have much merit. If she's a girl, she's a girl, and that's how she got into the quotas. So what the quotas actually bring is that there are more women in the board, for example, in the parliament, and so in companies. I've no doubt that what they are looking for are women who have better conditions to perform these duties. And the data doesn't say that since there have been quotas, the performance of the companies that are subject to this law is worse. No, and normally there are some studies that say that it's a little bit the other way around. And from the point of view of the financial and economic performance, it's more interesting. And so this is a discussion that I always like to say this. I participated a lot in these discussions. We can say that it questions that merit. So we want to use an argument that's based on nothing, and so that is the same type of argument. They don't want to share power. They want everything to stay the same, and so these women who are coming along, they're only here because they're women, and that's the only reason they're here. No, I don't think that's the case. What would be ideal is that when we have as many men and women to be in the board or in management positions, then the quotas could be set aside. Other discrimination factors, I would say, this is not going to happen. And I think that one day, because this is a real question, I think, and you're absolutely right, this has to be that is, we have to lead for equality and to equality in all its aspects. And so this has to start when people are very young. And so today, if we start looking, there are many blacks, there could be black people that could be CEOs or whatever. And so there are applications to funds and that programs that they actually say this and say that they favour the blacks. And so the black people, and they say that this is a reason why they're going to select certain candidates because of this question, because the public bodies that make these funds public for the black culture. And I know there are many Europeans that there are tenders for independent journalism, specifically for African journalists. You have to know where the source is. It's not easy to find. There's a resistance in not sharing or accepting this change, as I said. Well, I think it's a discussion that's going to happen in recent years, and I wouldn't be surprised if it happens soon. The community directive for parity in women has just been approved. It was in a draw for 10 years, and only now has it come out. And now it happens. There's a great deal of resistance, but there's a resistance. To generations. Am I still going to be alive when it comes out? Yeah. And so I think there's going to be discussion in the future, and it's probably Mariana, what is your opinion in this part of executives? What do you think? As you've already said, as the panelists have already said, this is a process that takes a long time. And I think it is possible to choose the wars that are going to be waged. At the beginning, I was against the quotas, and if you spoke to most women are against quotas, and in this aspect that they don't want to access the places just because over quotas. They want to have, they want to get there through merit, and so I think the quota is the merit. Why aren't we able to make a choice based on merit? And the topic of quotas nowadays, I'm giving in because I think the quotas have accelerated this process. If not, we wouldn't be here talking about this. But the fear I have is that we are going back to a pure discrimination. If I'm making a program only for blacks, for people with motor disabilities, then I'm preventing other people who hadn't as much merit as them could apply for such a program. So I don't have a position on the subject. I would like the discussion to be around merit, and I would like the discussion to be, we'd be looking for people with characters of this type. Where are they, and why don't they apply? And that's what Carlos was saying, to work before this. Don't we have this pipeline of talent? So what actually happens by creating many rules and boxes and stuff, and I think that basically we're just making that instead of merit, we're privileging other things. André, so you can answer if you want to ask a question. Is the lady will have to speak into the microphone. No mic, no interpretation.
Da meritocracia, há mais sobre diversidade, que é muito importante. Mas falamos também, às vezes, pouco sobre a meritocracia já lá estando. Ou seja, não é só um problema de a entrada na empresa, independentemente das questões de cotas e daquelas que são.
So these questions of quotas, but I think that quite often the question of meritocracy is not well addressed by companies. What I mean by that equality in a performance of an assessment plan, and with the same criteria for everybody. It doesn't allow you to understand the meritocracy of that person who has questions related to diversity or disability. And so I also would like to hear your opinion on whether, in fact, after going through this initial phase, meritocracy is not being one of improving the situation in companies. In terms of qualities, I'm rather sceptic about qualities. I remember whether I'll go there through the merit, but I don't think the qualities are dealing with. I'm not dealing with a minority. The shut funnel is the same with there are as many men as women, and we are creating a problem that is obvious. It's not to do with minorities, and that is what I would like to say. I accept the topic of quotas because Mariana said that we're going to take many more years to get there. My topic is about meritocracy and how companies can concentrate on giving value to people and what they have and the skills they have and what they add to the companies. Would you like to talk about quotas? I agree with the opinion, but this meritocracy in my company, I think it's a non-topic. Literally, I know the reality of clients, and we incorporate evaluation systems and clients, and it's fair, and people are assessed and based on their merit, and they're promoted on this basis. There are many multinational companies that have there are thousands of people. They allow us to fine-tune these evaluation systems, and some are very fair and promote through merit. Margarida? I think that companies are, or they want to be competitive. The topic of meritocracy is totally accepted if it's not those who are more able to get to positions of leadership or to decide in the destiny, in the future of the company. Then the question of meritocracy is a much easier topic of diversity.
mas que
I'm going to say something controversial, which unfortunately I feel is true. Quite honestly, I've never seen. I don't think that in view of a need of promotion that somebody says, no, he's far by, he is the best by far, but he's gay. No, it can't be. No, he's the best by far, he's Afghan or he's black. No, I don't think that it happens in the company, even for reasons of competitiveness. But I believe it is possible saying, no, she's the ablest, but she's going to be pregnant, she's going to be at home when the children get sick. She's very able, but I think it's going to be varied. She's going to be less committed. So in terms of meritocracy, in all the rest, I believe the minorities are lagging behind in this progression than women, because women are being benefited by quotas. But in relation to meritocracy, I witness, for instance, I'm not going to have a CFO which goes home for 6 months because she's pregnant. And then there's a whole series of comments. So I believe that in meritocracy, women are fare worse than certain minorities. I don't imagine that in today's world you say, no, we can't have him because he's gay. We see big international banks being led by people who are gay, married with men. So I don't believe that this topic is so unusual in a normal world. But a company who wants to be competitive, I don't think so. He's the best, but he has a small problem. He's gay. I don't think. I think it's no longer the case. Margarida, I don't think that's the case. You've got a false idea of things saying that a company is composed of men with a given way of thinking, and there is a vacancy and say, okay, comes André because he's gay. No, what? No, they are inside. Yes, in fact, when joining the company, this is a topic. I don't believe that this is so simple. You have a great faith in this country. Well, I'm a chronic optimist. Let me tell you, to talk about merit, well, associate the question of quotas and merit is a privilege. Only those who are inside can think, okay, let's talk about merit. Those who are outside, how are they going to do it better because there are quotas for you, but what about me? Somebody says, but I don't want to quotas because it's going to question my own merit. This is a privilege because you're rather inside. And those who are outside, those who have not even an option to go in, are they going to question the merit? A guy who says, maybe you have a place, a vacancy for a journalist on television. No, do you want to go? You're black, but no, I don't know because this is going to be awarded to the best, and it's just because a question of merit. No, it doesn't make any sense. Even if you're inside, you're an insider. Just like I said before, we can't talk about merit because we not have the same starting point. When the parents can't pay tutorials to their children, how many CEOs and human resources managers say, well, I'm entrepreneur since when I was 19 years because in your father's company. Well, my father's not even here. this is a fallacy. This is a non-issue. We don't come from the same. We don't start from the same. You know, the soccer fields and the paddle fields. In a neighborhood, you have a soccer, for instance. If you have a gay or a black CEO, is disseminating a message. You have you're telling the young black boy your future is to be a soccer player. No, I'm sorry, we have no microphone from the public, so we can't interpret the question. Sorry, we can't hear the question. For instance, you or the group of people who would like, we're going to cover the Moura neighborhood site to still, Martin, help us to play paddle. Then we're going to call the police officers. Now you're talking about the existence of a paddle, a field, and you should go. No, this is not what I said. You got didn't say. So people would like to play paddle. I only have a soccer field, and if there are many people who would like to want to play paddle, why people have to ask? This is what we tell. We have because this is we. Okay, I'm sad to have to give an opportunity to other people. This is interesting. We have to ask. Everybody has to ask because people can't guess. We have to play an active part. Okay, I'm the moderator. Because I have two further questions. Well, I'd like to talk about this and answering you, replying to first of you saying you. A black person is saying you. I have many opportunities, but I know that if I get to a company, if somebody has the same merit as I do, I'm not going to be chosen because I'm black, and I'm going to be because a white person is going to be chosen, so you have no right to comment and to you call a black person saying you because you all of you come from the neighborhood. I had opportunities, and it is ridiculous for somebody who doesn't live, has the same experience. Another question. You can talk outside if you want.
Questions?
Este tempo.
A minha questão
Deixa
a senhora fazer a questão.
Não faz mal.
Sim, mas
quem vai, a senhora tem o microfone, consegue falar mais alto.
Alarmada porque
These are very sensitive issues. I believe that we reach the point which is common, has to do with the social economic status. There are several privileges, and each one has its own opinion. I have mine. We all have the same rights. In principle, some are born with privileges that others don't have. The way is I look at the world. The truth is that the socioeconomic status affects people. So a black person has to face racism, as a white person has to deal with questions relating to the status, economic conditions, but doesn't face racism. So I have different sorts of privilege associated to different countries, and the problem is that when I have the intersection of several, this is where meritocracy comes in. The question is in relation to socioeconomic status, which is fundamental to have access to some experiences that we allow to join companies, but also, to how do we combat these inside companies? These are macro scenarios which have to do with the countries. How do we fight these within companies? How do we break some biases which don't promote a black person because of the accent? Sometimes the accent is people saying, somebody saying, is gay. Why do you strike the balance?
Quer responder aqui?
Would like to answer?
Eu posso responder.
I can reply, but it's one of those topics you really have to solve upstream. It really depends on public policies. Companies have the responsibility of collaborating, and quite honestly, there are many companies who invest a great deal in education when they choose a topic to invest or an SDG. They choose quite often education to do so. The best way of taking somebody out of poverty is education. So sometimes companies invest in social and development areas. But this has to be solved upstream through public policies. My hope is the fact that we have more women members of parliament. They devise better public policies than those which are made by men. Let's see if this is true. But I believe that this is a problem is more upstream. The final question at the top, let's put them two together and we close the session.
A seguir. Juntamos e depois...
This is very confrontational on the viewpoint of those who suffer the prejudice. We are putting many things together. I'd like to ask a question. All the work which is being developed today is based upon data, right? André only works with data. Innovation is all based upon big data, and we can't do anything without data, right?
Como a Sandra disse, há elefante.
But there is an elephant in the room, like Sandra said. We have no data, but we know that the elephant is there. Knowing that it's there tells us that this is a structural problem. Until there is no politics of change, society will be responsible for change. The question is, How can companies, namely data companies, have something new to tell us? If I have no data, nothing can be done. But the United States, you have data, but how can the companies working with data have proposals? How can they inform public policies for inclusion, diversity, equity, and all these topics we've been discussing today? How can we solve the problem of the elephant in the room? Another question, the last one. This is not a question, but I can transform my comment into a question. Margarida Couto said that a person may not be promoted within a company for being gay, and for gay didn't think that it wouldn't be promoted, and he said that this is meritocracy. Well, meritocracy can be criticized, but meritocracy is a choice of the best person for a given role. It's not the best choosing the best out of the three who are in the company, and the companies select based upon a pipeline. How can we call a system meritocratic in companies, public administration, universities, and elsewhere, that we know that from the start there is 1 million children that is never going to reach that far just because they were born in a given place? This is a system which is profoundly anti-meritocratic. Do you believe that this system is really meritocratic? Are we really appointing the best possible person of the universe of people in Portugal?
Muito bem, Margarida, responda a esta, depois a seguir empresa de dados. Vamos...
Well, okay. Could you reply? My comment was about what is taking place inside the company. You have to, for instance, to promote. You promote within the companies, inside the company. Those who could not get there, they are not in the panel. I said that if the person who is in the best possible conditions for this role, if he's gay or black, I believe that today there is no company who has the courage to not to choose the person X because he's or she's gay. If there were many people who never joined the company and they're never to be the part of the batch of the three which are about to be promoted, I agree. But what companies also do is to invest in educational projects. I'm going to give an example because I know it quite well. Teach for Portugal is a multinational project, so this is, it might have an English name, but it's very Portuguese, in fact. Their claim is the postal code of a child cannot decide his or her future, and this program is funded by companies, many companies, so companies are worried with this. But again, companies can't help in solving the problem, but the problem has to do with public policy. The fact that there's 1 million children that are never going to have an opportunity. This is a problem of all of us. Civil society is not a problem just of the companies, and not surely the companies which can solve it. Okay, relation to the data companies. I'm really apologize, says the moderator, we have no more time. Well, we can't say. So, Mitsu, this is a specific company. This is the example because we are talking about the global scope, you know. But the problem has to be solved with the public policies, not the companies going to solve the whole world's problems. There are many internal measures. So the reality of us we are companies with a meritocratic system within the company. In relation to the data companies, I do not work with the data on inclusion, but these data are public. You should just search reports on transparency, diversity and inclusion. I have the Deloitte reports, and which are made available for everybody to see. And they share their targets and their objectives, which they want to attain in the next couple of years. So they can collect data in certain countries, they share with the population, share it with government, and they change. If you look at other companies in the places of the world, because they are transparent, because they are accountable for what they do, they are improving people's lives. They are more diverse companies. Don't forget, diversity matters, but they also have to be inclusive to promote equity, because then again, we all have to be have the same circumstances. They try to place, since they are good, they have to put people at the same level so as to have the same opportunities to reach the top. And if you look at the foreign companies, they are much better in terms of diversity and inclusion than some years ago. Thank André, Mariana, Sandra, Carlos, Margarida. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
You kill your fella.
I didn't know that paddle would be such a problem.
Obrigada à escola. É uma escola só que cá está? Ou são duas? Uma escola.
Thank you very much for attending here. I hope that you've enjoyed this panel. Thank you for having attended this session.